Hey there! Tonight I'm reading scary Reddit stories, and I'm rating every one of them out of 10. Not on how good they are, on how badly they'd ruin your night if it happened to you. If you disagree with me, say so in the comments. I'll give you my score after each story. And while you're listening, you can enjoy my Minecraft playthrough. This is part 2, and yes, this is the first time I've ever played this game. This first one is from r/NoSleep, from a user called Pine Lake Watch. I'm a backcountry ranger in Algonquin. Something out here has learned how to call for help. I've been a backcountry ranger in Algonquin Provincial Park for 12 years. Interior patrol, which means I don't sit in the booth at the access point selling firewood and bug spray. I paddle. 8 days on, 6 days off, from the middle of May until the lakes start to skin over in November. The job is mostly garbage. I mean that literally. I paddle a route, I check permits, I dig out fire pits, and I haul other people's tin cans and foil and wet toilet paper out of the bush in a blue barrel that rides between my knees. I replace the boards on outhouses. I cut deadfall off portages with a folding saw that I sharpen badly. In a good week, I see maybe 6 people. Pay is $24 an hour. The cabin at the staging lake has mice in the walls and a propane fridge that ticks all night. My partner for the last 5 years is a guy named Dev, who's better at this job than I am, and who carries his instant coffee in a Ziploc because he says the can adds weight. 5 years of the same argument about that can. I'm telling you the boring part on purpose because you need to understand that I know this park. I know what a loon sounds like at 2 in the morning, and I know how it's different at 4. I know what a moose sounds like coming down through cedar. I know what wind does on the big lakes and what it does on the little ones. And I know that sound over flat water at dusk will carry a kilometer and arrive sounding like it came from 10 meters away. The other thing you need to know is a name. Mark Dessereau. My first season, week 2, we had a lost hiker. Mark Dessereau, 43, out of Gatineau. Went out for 4 days on the Highland backpacking trail and didn't come out. We searched for 2 days. Ground teams walking a grid and calling his name, the helicopter, dogs, the whole apparatus. On the morning of the 3rd day, he walked out on his own at the Mew Lake access point. Dehydrated, sunburned, absolutely fine. He told the paramedics he'd been following a voice, that somebody had been calling his name from off the trail and he'd gone after it. And every time he got close to it, it moved. He said that for about a day, and then he stopped saying it, because everybody kept patiently explaining to him that he'd been dehydrated. I laughed about that, not to his face. But I was 23, and I laughed about it in the bunkhouse. And for the next 12 years, it was just a story I told new hires in the evenings. Keep his name. I come back to him at the end of this. I want to be clear before I go any further. I don't know what this is. I'm not going to tell you it's a demon or a skinwalker or anything else with a name, because I don't know. And the people who put a name on it are guessing the same as me. All I can tell you is what it does. This was last August, the 14th, I think. It might have been the 15th, and I know that's an annoying thing to be vague about when the rest of this is going to be very specific. We were 3 days into a 5-day loop, coming off Burnt Root and down into a small, unnamed pond that you get to through 2 short portages. Nobody camps there. There's no site. We were only crossing it because it saves an hour. We stopped in the middle of that pond because Dev wanted to eat, and Dev eats sitting still or not at all. It was maybe half an hour before full dark. The water was flat. That kind of flat where you can see the whole tree line upside down in it. And from the shore behind us, somebody said, "Dev," not shouted, said, at a conversational volume from about 40 meters. And it was my voice, not the way everybody else hears it, the way it sounds to me from the inside, which is a thing I've never heard from the outside before and would very much like to stop thinking about. Dev turned around. He said, "What?" And then he said, "Was that you?" Here's the part where I imagine some of you are already typing. Why didn't you just leave? Why didn't you paddle away right then? Because it's the job. Somebody calling out at dusk in the interior is a person in trouble. That's the entire thing we're out there for. If we hear a voice from the shore and we decide not to go look, there's a chance somebody turns up face down in that pond a week later, and that one's on me for the rest of my life. You don't get to be the guy who heard a voice and decided it was creepy. So we did the procedure, and the procedure is the whole problem, which I didn't understand at the time. We paddled to shore. We called out. We got out and walked the bank both directions for about 200 meters each way with headlamps, looking for a pack, a boot print, a fire ring, anything. There's no sight there, so we were looking for somebody who'd gotten off route. We found nothing. No prints in the mud at the water's edge except a heron's. Then we radioed it in. Dev did the call. He always did the calls. He says the same 8 words every single time, and I've heard him say them probably 2,000 times. Dispatch, this is Interior 2. Copy. All quiet. Then he'd add whatever the actual thing was. He reported a possible lost person. Unknown. 1 verbal contact. No visual. Dispatch logged it. And dispatch said what dispatch says, which is that they'd stage a team at the access point and go in at first light. We camped on the next lake over. Not that pond. I want credit for that at least. At about 1 in the morning, it did it again. And this is when I understood we had a problem, because it didn't say Dev. It made the radio noise. Our radios have a click when you key them, and then a little rise of static, and then the voice. It made all 3, the click, the static, and then Dev's voice saying, Dispatch, this is Interior 2, copy, all quiet, from the tree line, about 15 meters behind the tent. Dev was in the tent. Dev was lying next to me, gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks I could still see 2 days later. I don't know how long we sat there. Dev says 20 minutes. It felt like an hour and a half. It did it 5 more times that night, and each time it changed something. Once it did the click and the static and then nothing, just an open channel and breathing, which is a thing our radios physically can't do because they only work when you key them. Once it did my voice saying Dev again. Once it did a woman. The last one I'm not going to write down. I typed it twice and deleted it both times, and my hands are doing a thing right now that they don't normally do, so we're moving on. I tried to record it. I want that on the record because somebody always asks. I put my phone in a dry bag with the top open and left it running on the log by the fire ring for 3 hours. The file is 4 minutes long, because the phone decides on its own when the sound is worth keeping, and all 4 minutes are wind. In the morning, it was quiet. The sun comes up and everything is gorgeous, and there are chickadees, and Dev made coffee out of the Ziploc, and we didn't talk about it for about 40 minutes. Then Dev said, "It's calling names." And I said, "We've been saying our names out loud for 3 days. It's copying us." And Dev said, "No. Listen to what it actually said. It didn't call your name. It called mine. In your voice. It wasn't copying sound. It was copying the shape of the thing. Somebody calling out for somebody else. It had the click and the static and the 8 words because those 8 words are the sound of a person telling somebody else where they are." And then I thought about the woman's voice because I'd been trying not to. There was a search in 2017. A woman named Aline, 62, out on a day paddle from a lodge on the east side. 4 days. Around 60 volunteers walking the ridges above big trout in a line about 10 meters apart. And the way you do it is you shout the name, then you count 3, then the person next to you shouts it, all the way down the line, and then it comes back the other way. For 4 days. Aline! 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 Then dogs, then a diver, then a coroner, and then a woman I'd never met asked me on the phone whether her mother had been cold. That's what a search is. If you've never been in one, that's honestly all it is. It's 100 people walking into the bush and shouting a stranger's name for as long as their voices hold out, and then going home and doing it again the next morning. I sat on a rock with a cup of instant coffee, and I did the arithmetic on 12 years, and it came to 11 searches. 11 names, 3 of them for more than 2 days, from every direction, hundreds of mouths, in the same 40 kilometers of bush. We've been teaching it. For as long as anyone has been getting lost out there, we've been standing in the trees teaching it exactly what a person in trouble sounds like. And then we go home, and it stays. Dev asked me how far sound carries at dusk over flat water, and I said about a kilometer. And he said, "So how far does it carry over 4 days?" We sat on that shore until about 10 in the morning and didn't do any of our actual work. At one point, I saw a man standing in the shallows on the far side, and I didn't say anything to Dev for a good 90 seconds, and then Dev said, "It's a stump." And then the radio came to life, and dispatch said the team was staging at the access point. 22 people. They were going in at 10, and they were going to spend 3 days walking a grid through that pond and the 2 lakes either side of it, calling out. I want you to understand what I did next, because I've had a year to decide whether it was the right call, and I still don't know. I keyed the radio, and I lied. I said we'd located the source. I said it was 2 teenagers off a canoe route with a Bluetooth speaker and a bad sense of humor, that we'd talked to them, that they'd been escorted out, that there was no lost person. I gave a fake permit number. Dev sat 2 feet away from me and listened to me do it and said nothing. And then, when I put the radio down, he leaned over the side of the canoe and threw up his breakfast. Dispatch stood the team down. 22 people got back in their cars. We paddled out that night, and this is the only useful thing in this whole post, so if you skimmed, read this part. It answers. That's all it does. It doesn't hunt, it doesn't track, it doesn't come and get you. It waits for a sound with a person's shape in it, and it gives it back to you. And it moves closer while you're deciding what it was. So we did the whole thing silent. No headlamps, no radio. We taped the buckles on the barrel so they wouldn't click. 2 portages in the dark by feel, which is a spectacularly stupid thing to do with a canoe on your shoulders, and which I'd fire somebody for. Dev went first with a hand on the stern. When we needed to say something, we tapped the gunnel. 2 taps for stop, 3 for go. And that was the entire language we had for about 5 hours. It called out to us 10 or 12 times on the way, and I'm not going to describe those either, except to say that one of them was a child, and there has never, in 12 years, been a child on that route. The hard part isn't being scared. The hard part is that every single one of those is a person asking you for help, and your whole job and most of your personality is answering. Twice on that stretch, I had the breath in my chest to answer, and both times Dev heard me take it and stopped walking until I let it go. It never got what it wanted, which was an answer. Past the second portage it stopped, and we got to the truck at about 4 in the morning, and neither of us said a word until Dev put the key in and the radio in the truck came on with the sports station. Here's the aftermath. The lie came out. There was no permit matching the number I gave. I sat in an office in October and explained myself to a superintendent I actually like, and I didn't tell her the truth, because the truth ends your career in about 10 seconds. I said I'd panicked and wanted to end the call-out. I got a written warning for falsifying a radio log, and it stays on my file for 3 years, and I came closer to losing this job than I've ever come to losing anything. Dev backed me the whole way and never once asked me to change my story. He put in for a front country transfer in January. He's at a gate now, selling firewood and bug spray. We text about hockey. We haven't talked about that night since the truck, not once, and I think that's how it's going to stay. I still work the interior. I know how that sounds. It's 12 years of my life, and I'm not qualified for anything else. And also, somebody who knows should be out there. And Marc Dessureau walked out on his own, and I laughed about it in a bunkhouse for 12 years, and I'd like to formally apologize to him, wherever he is. We changed how we do it now. When there's a name that needs saying out loud on the water, we don't say it. I write it on the back of my hand in pen and hold it up. It comes off in the water by lunchtime, and I write it again. Edit. To the people asking, yes, the incident report exists, and yes, you could probably find it. No, I'm not giving you my badge number. To the guy asking why I didn't record it, I did try, The file is 4 minutes of wind. Okay, I've got 9 out of 10, and the only reason it isn't a 10 is that they got out. The thing that gets me is the arithmetic. 11 searches. That's not a monster, that's a whole curriculum. Next one is short, and it's completely real. No creature, no woods. A window, a street in the north of England, and one extremely boring object that makes the whole thing collapse. The next story is from r/let's not meet, from a user called 16th January. It's called, "There was a man at my window for 9 months, and I only saw him because of a light." This was February 2019. I was 24, and I'd been in Sheffield about a year for a job I'd moved for, receptionist at a veterinary practice, which is the only job I've ever loved, and I don't have it anymore. And that's part of this. I rented a room in a shared row house off Crooksmoor Road. 4 of us, £390 a month each, plus bills. My room was the ground floor back, which everybody warned me about, and I took anyway because it was the cheapest, and it had the big window. The window looked out onto the passage that runs between our house and the one behind, the narrow alley where the bins live. On the 6th of February, I got in from work at about 6:30 and went to draw the curtains, and there was a man's face in the window. I screamed. He didn't move for about a second, and then he walked off up the passage, not ran, walked, like a man who'd been interrupted doing something legitimate. I did everything you're supposed to do, and I want that on the record, because I've read enough of these to know what the comments do. I ran to the front and got Priya, my housemate, and we checked the doors. I called 101 that night. I gave a description. White man, older, glasses, dark coat. That's all I had. The call handler was decent with me and told me honestly that a man standing in a public passage looking at a house is not, on its own, something they can act on. She logged it. She gave me a reference number. I still have it written on the back of a drugstore receipt. The next day I bought a window lock for £12, and Priya's boyfriend fitted it. I bought blackout curtains and I taped the edges to the frame with masking tape, which looked insane and which I did anyway. 2 weeks later, I bought a doorbell camera and stuck it on the back door, angled to catch the passage. And I started keeping a list, dates and times, in a notebook. That matters later, and I hate that it does. He came back on the 10th, the 12th, the 19th, then most nights. I asked the landlord to put a light in the passage, and he said the passage wasn't his. It's shared. And he was right. It isn't his. I wrote to the council and got a letter back turning me down. The thing nobody warns you about is how quickly it becomes paperwork. By the 3rd week, I wasn't frightened in a dramatic way. I was tired. I was calling 101 every few days to add to a log I already knew nothing was going to come of. Priya slept in my room twice. Her boyfriend sat in the kitchen with the light off one night for 3 hours and saw nothing. And after that, I could feel everybody quietly deciding there was something wrong with me. Here's the thing that broke me. And it's stupid, and it's the reason I'm writing this. The window is high. The passage is a good bit lower than our floor level, so the bottom of my window sits at about the height of a tall man's chest. So a face in it is a face looking up at you. On the 2nd of March, the face was at the top of the window, looking down. I lay on that bed and looked up at a man looking down into my room, and my brain simply stopped producing anything. I didn't scream that time. I don't remember what I did for the next however long. Priya says I came upstairs and sat on her floor and wouldn't talk, and I'll take her word for it, because I've got nothing. And I convinced myself it was something else, because a man can't be 3 feet taller on a Tuesday. As it turned out later, he was standing on our wheelie bin. That's it. That's the whole trick. He'd wheeled our own black bin down the passage and stood on the lid. And when he was done, he'd wheeled it back, which is why nobody ever noticed it in the wrong place. The doorbell camera got him on the 14th of March, twice, once going up the passage at 10 after 11, and once coming back at about midnight with his hand on the bin handle. That footage is what changed it from a woman calling 101 into an actual thing the police could do something about. And once they had it, they were fast. And they were good. And I have no complaints about them at all. They arrested him 12 days later. He was 56. He lived 3 streets away, on the other side of the main road, in a house I'd walked past on the way to the big grocery store probably 200 times. He had no connection to me, or to the house, or to the practice, or to anybody I knew. And both the police and the court went looking for one, because everybody wants there to be one. There isn't one. He'd never been in trouble before in his life. He had a job at a company that services elevators. He had a wife who was in the gallery, and I've thought about her more than I've thought about him. He had a notebook. It was in a backpack in his shed, and I only know what was in it because it was read out in court, and because my victim liaison officer, who was kind to me, told me the rest afterward when I asked her to. It was my week. What time I left in the morning, which was 10 after 7 for the bus. What time I got in, which nights I was out. When my curtains changed, when the window lock went on, with a note. And the first entry in it is the 11th of May, 2018. Do that arithmetic with me. I moved into that room on the 21st of April, 2018. He'd been in that passage for 9 months before I ever saw his face, and I only saw it because in the last week of January, the couple at 43 had a security light put in over their yard door, and it threw light down a passage that had never had any. That's all. There's no more to it than that. 9 months of nothing, and then an electrician. He got 16 months, suspended for 2 years, plus a restraining order and the sex offender registry for 10. I'm not going to argue about the sentence in the comments. I've had that argument in my own head enough. I broke the lease in April and lost my deposit, £615. I moved back to my mum's in Barnsley for 8 months, and I left the practice because I couldn't do the commute, and that job is the thing I'm actually angry about, more than the rest of it, which I understand is a strange thing to say. Priya and I don't speak anymore, and that isn't her fault. The other thing is the wheelie bin. It's been 6 years, and I still can't hear one being wheeled on a sidewalk without my whole body doing something. It's the most ordinary sound in the country, every street in England, every Tuesday. The liaison officer told me one more thing about the notebook, and I've thought about it every day for 6 years. The first page is messy. Half the entries are crossed out, times wrong, dates in the wrong order. By the end, it's neat. It's in columns. It's got headings. He got better at it. 6 out of 10, and I need to explain that because this is the one that actually got to me. 6 on how badly it ruins your night, because there's nothing waiting in the dark afterward. 10 on how badly it ruins your year. This next one is one of the longest in the video, and it's the opposite in every way. Slow, cold, an apartment building in Sweden, and the entire horror of it is arithmetic. Somebody counts something, the number is wrong, and he does everything right for 4 months. And everything in it is in meters, so, one time only, a meter is about a yard. That's all the converting you'll need to do tonight. The next story is from r/no sleep, from a user called Bergsvagen. It's called, Our Building Doesn't Have a Number 14. Quick word to whoever isn't looking at the screen. You've got a good while left, and nothing after this gets loud. If you're in the middle of something, I hope you're nearly done. If you're already half asleep, that's a good use of this video. Bergsvagen is a street of 4 buildings on the western edge of a suburb outside Örebro, and they go 8, 10, 12, 16. There is no number 14. When we moved in, Nina made a joke about it, that it was like a hotel skipping the 13th floor, and the woman from the rental agency laughed and said something about the numbering being done by the city in the 60s, and nobody ever having fixed it. And that was the last time either of us thought about it for 4 months. We took the apartment in October 2021. 2 rooms and a kitchen, 4th floor, 7,900 kroner a month, which for that area is normal, and for that apartment was a good deal. I was 29, Nina was 31. I picked orders at a logistics warehouse out by the highway, 4:30 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon, which is relevant only because it meant I was often the only person awake in that building. We moved in on a Saturday in the rain with a rented van and my brother, and we finished at about 5, and Systembolaget closes at 3 on a Saturday, which is the single most Swedish sentence in this post, and also why we drank tea. Nina works in procurement for a company that sells hospital furniture. She's the most organized person I've ever met, and she labels boxes at both ends. I mention that because when she later told me she'd stopped going down to the laundry room, it turned out she'd been carrying wet washing up 4 flights in a plastic basket for 6 weeks rather than say anything. And if you knew her, you'd understand how strange that is. If you've never been in a Swedish building from that era, the basement is the whole social system of the place. There's the laundry room, which you book with a padlock on a board by the door, and there's always one person who moves other people's locks, and everybody knows who it is, and nobody says anything for 20 years. There's the recycling room, where you sort into 6 bins, and somebody's grandmother watches you do it. There's the boiler room you're not supposed to go into. And there's the storage, which is a corridor with cages down both sides, chicken wire on wooden frames, and 1 cage for each apartment. Ours was number 47. It says so on the lease, and it said so on the little metal tag they gave us with the key. The corridor has 44 cages. I counted them on the first Saturday, standing there with 2 IKEA bags of winter stuff, and I got 22 on the left and 22 on the right, and the corridor ended in a wall with an old painted-over sign on it, and there was no 47. So I did what you do. I went up and I found Rickard, the building manager, who was in the yard with a leaf blower, and I told him, and he turned the blower off and looked at me with the specific patience of a man who has heard everything. And he said, "Go look again." And I went and looked again, and 47 was there, 3rd from the end on the left, between 46 and 48, with a padlock hasp and no padlock, and a piece of blue tape with our apartment number on it in ballpoint. I want to be honest about what I did with that, because I think it's the most human part of this. I decided I'd counted wrong. It was late. I'd been driving a pallet jack since 4:30 in the morning, and the light down there is 1 bulb every 6 meters. Anybody would have decided that. I put the bags in the cage and I went upstairs and I ate dinner. 4 months later, I was measuring that corridor with a 5-meter tape measure twice a week and writing the numbers in pencil on the wall by the door. And I'd like to walk you through how a person gets from one of those to the other, because it's not one big moment, it's about a dozen small ones. In November, I noticed the corridor took longer to walk. That's not a measurement, that's a feeling, I know. But you learn a route. You know how many steps to the laundry room. In December, there were 2 cages after 50 that had nothing in them at all. No tape, no numbers, no padlocks, chicken wire and a wooden frame and a concrete floor with nothing on it. Not even dust, and that's the detail I couldn't put down. Everything else in that basement had 40 years of dust on it. In January, I started counting properly, not by walking, with my phone, filming as I went, and then counting off the video at the kitchen table with a coffee, because I didn't trust my eyes down there, and I was right not to. The 10th of January, 51 cages. The 17th, 51. The 24th, 63. That's not a feeling anymore. Sitting at a kitchen table at 2:30 in the afternoon with the light already going, in a warm apartment with a coffee, scrubbing back and forth through a phone video and touching the screen with a finger every time a wooden frame goes past, and getting a number, and then doing it again to check, and getting the same number. Nothing frightening happens at a kitchen table. That's why it works. I made Nina count one of them. She got 63 too. She put the phone face down on the table and went and stood at the window for a bit, and then said, "We're not going to be able to tell anybody this." And she was right. And that's the actual mechanism of the whole thing. There's no point at which you can say it out loud. What are the words? Our basement has too many rooms in it. You can't say that to a landlord, or your mother, or a doctor, and you certainly can't say it to a man who has just measured it in front of you. I want to be very clear that nothing chased me. Nothing was ever standing at the end of the corridor. I've read 100 of these, and I know the shape they usually take, and this one doesn't take it. It's just a corridor, and it's cold, and it's longer. I did the reasonable things, and they all failed for reasons I can state. I emailed the housing company on the 25th with the video attached. They replied in 12 days and sent a guy out, a nice guy in a company fleece, who measured the corridor with a laser and got 19.2 meters and showed me the screen and asked me, not unkindly, if I was sleeping enough. I measured it myself the following Tuesday at 5:30 in the morning and got 26.4. I have the photograph of the tape against the wall, and it's the least impressive photograph in the world, because a tape measure against a concrete wall looks the same at any number. It never did it while anybody official was down there. I know how that sounds. It's the exact thing a person making this up would say. But I'm not going to invent a version where it performed on command just so the story is tidier. I told Nina in January, and she believed me faster than I'd expected, because she'd stopped using the laundry room in December and hadn't told me why. She said the dryer room made her feel like there was a window behind her. There's no window in the laundry room. It's 5 meters underground. By the end of January, I was going down at 4 in the morning before work, every day. And in February, the cages had things in them. Not new things. A Husqvarna sewing machine in a case, wooden skis with leather bindings, a stack of moving boxes with a company name printed on them in a typeface that wasn't from this century, and one box on top with a word written on it in marker. And the word was barn, which just means children, and which is on about 1 million boxes in 1 million basements in this country, and which I could not look at. There was a folding cot. Not a cot with anything in it, a cot, folded, leaning against the wire, the way you'd leave one when you're done with it. And there was one cage, somewhere in the 70s, with a laundry basket in it, and folded washing in the basket. And I put 2 fingers through the wire and touched a towel, and it was damp. That's the one I'd like to forget. Everything else I can hold at arm's length. That one I think about when I'm falling asleep. I also want to tell you about the laundry room, quickly, because it's the only time the wrong thing came up out of the corridor. In the last week of January, I went down at 4 in the morning, and the machines were running. All 3 of them, mid-cycle, water going, the drums turning. The door was locked, which it is at night, and I could see through the glass panel, and the booking board was empty. Not one lock on it. I stood there long enough to be sure, and then I went to work and did a full shift and told nobody. And when I came back at 2 in the afternoon, the room was open and dry and cold, and the machines had that dead feeling machines have when nothing has used them in a while. And the numbers went past 80. I got to 88 on the 12th of February, and the corridor ended in the same wall it had always ended in. Here's where I finally did the one useful thing I did in that whole 4 months, and if you take anything out of this, take this. Stop looking at the thing and go look at the paperwork about the thing. Every municipality in this country keeps a building permit archive, and you can just ask them for it. You write them a letter. It's free, and it's the most boring superpower available to an ordinary person. I wrote 3 sentences saying I lived at this address and would like the original plans, and I expected nothing. And a woman named Suzanne replied in 2 days with a PDF and a note apologizing for the crooked scans. The plans are dated 1968, by hand. Somebody's initials in the corner and a coffee cup ring on the second sheet that got scanned along with everything else. And I remember thinking about the person who put a cup down on that in '68. I opened them on my phone standing in the warehouse parking lot on my lunch break, with a plastic tray of cooling pasta on the hood, and I sat down on the curb. Buildings 12 and 14 were one building underground. They were built at the same time, by the same company, and everything below ground level was shared. One boiler room, one laundry room, one shelter, because every building from that era has a civil defense shelter in the basement, with a steel door and an orange sign with a blue triangle on it. And one storage corridor running the whole length of both buildings, with the cages numbered straight through from one end to the other. The wall at the end of our corridor isn't a wall, it's a doorway. On a later drawing from 1982, there's a note, and it says the opening is to be closed with brick. And Building 14 isn't there. It was condemned for damp and demolished in 1996, and there's a parking lot with 11 spaces where it stood, and I've walked past that parking lot probably 300 times. In the same folder, I found the housing company's own inventory from 1979, a typed list of the storage cages at that address, 88 of them. So here's what I think actually happened, and I've had 3 years to come up with a better theory, and I haven't. I don't think our basement grew. Nothing was added to our building. Our building is completely normal, and I'd put my own mother in it. I think the wrong thing is next door, in a place that doesn't exist anymore, and it never stopped. And every so often it reaches back into the last building it's still attached to. The cold, the sounds, the corridor. None of it was ever ours. We were the wall it was pushing against. And that reframes the complaints I hadn't understood until then. There's a woman on the ground floor, Margaret, 81, who's lived in that building since it was built, and she's told me twice in the elevator that the neighbors are noisy through the wall in winter. I said something polite about old buildings. Her apartment is on the end, on the west side. There are no neighbors through that wall. There's a parking lot with 11 spaces, and then a road. She's been complaining about it for as long as that parking lot has been a parking lot. To the housing company, which files it, to the building manager, who says he'll look into it, and to a young man in an elevator who nodded at her, which reframes the one genuinely bad night, and then I'll finish. The 18th of February, 10 after 4 in the morning. I was at cage 47, and I heard the elevator. I want to explain why that's the worst sentence in this post. Our elevator is in the north stairwell, and it doesn't go down to the basement at all. It stops at the ground floor. There are stairs, and that's the only way down. But I heard the elevator, the whole sequence, the motor, the bump when it lands, and then the doors. And they were the old kind with the folding metal gate that you have to pull, which our building hasn't had since a renovation in 2004. It landed somewhere behind the end wall, and then somebody slowly dragged something heavy across concrete for about 6 seconds in the direction of a doorway that's been bricked up since 1982. I didn't run. I'd like to tell you I ran. I stood in a cold corridor with my hand on the wire of cage 47 and listened to a building that isn't there put something into storage. Then it went quiet, and I walked back the way I came, and the corridor was 19 meters long, and I was at the stairs in about 20 seconds. That's the part people don't expect. It doesn't keep you. It lets you go every single time. You could go down there 100 nights and nothing would ever happen to you. And that's exactly why I kept going down. And it's why I think some version of me is still doing it. That morning I went to work, a full shift picking orders. At about 9:30, I sat down on a pallet in aisle 14, and a supervisor named Mika asked if I was all right, and I said I hadn't slept. And that was true. We moved out and took a place in Kumla, about 40 kilometers south, where Nina and I sleep fine. We left our stuff in the cage. That's the part my brother can't get over. 2 boxes of books, a tent, my father's tools, and a good stepladder. I handed the key back at the housing company counter, and the woman asked me whether the storage cage was empty, and I said yes. I've thought about driving over for those tools maybe 40 times. I'm not going to. Nina's fine. I asked her before I posted this, and she said, write it. In August, I was driving past, and I went into the yard, and there's a new building manager, a young guy, and I asked him, kind of offhand, how many storage cages there are down there, and he said, 44, same as always, and he said it in a completely ordinary voice, and I thanked him and got back in my car. The plans are in a folder on my computer, and I haven't opened them since, but the inventory I printed at work, the typed one from 79, is on our refrigerator in Kumla, under a magnet from a pizza place in Örebro that closed years ago. Nina has never once asked me to take it down. It's 1 page, Bergsvägen 12, 88. Edit. A few people have asked which suburb, and I'm not going to say, because somebody will go and stand in that parking lot, and I don't want a message from you at 4 in the morning. To the person who asked whether I checked the shelter door, it's inside the corridor, on the left, by number 31. And yes, it's locked. I didn't try very hard. 8 out of 10, and it loses 2 points purely because it takes 4 months to get going. This next one is real. It's American, and it's short. A kid, a ride home, and one sentence at a front door that tells you the whole town already knew. This story is from r/Let's Not Meet, from a user called Angelina County. It's called, "A regular at my job offered me a ride home when I was 16. Highway's shut," he said. "There's a wreck up at the loop." That was the first thing he said that wasn't true, and I had no way at all of knowing it. I was 16. This was 2017 in Angelina County in East Texas, in a town I'm not going to name because about 800 people live in it, and a couple of them would know exactly who I am. I bussed tables and cleaned the pit at a barbecue place on the highway, Friday and Saturday, 5:30 until we closed, and then another hour after that. $7.25 an hour plus a cut of the tip jar, which came out at about $15 a night. The place smelled of post oak so strongly that it got into my pillow. My mom did nights at the hospital in Lufkin. My ride home was my cousin Trey, who has a Corolla with no air conditioning and a stereo worth more than the car. That night he didn't come. His phone went to voicemail. Mine was at 4% because I was 16 and my phone was always almost dead. I stood out front for about 20 minutes calling him. Renata was counting the drawer and the cook was hosing the pit down, and there were maybe 3 cars left in the lot, and one of them was Dale's. I've been carrying plates to Dale for a year and a half. He came in Thursdays and most Saturdays. He ate the 2-meat plate, he tipped on the card, and then left 2 singles on the table on top of it. And he called my manager Renata ma'am every single time. He was maybe 50. He had a white F-250 with a toolbox in the bed and a company magnet on the door. He said he went right past my road. Renata heard him say it, and she said, "That's fine, that's Dale." I want to be really clear here, because I know how these threads go. I did not get in a car with a stranger down an alley. I got in a truck with a man my boss vouched for out loud in a parking lot with the lights on, 12 miles from my house, with a dead phone, at 11 at night, in a town with no taxis. If you want to tell me what I should have done, I've had 8 years to work through the list, and I've got it memorized. We got about 2 miles down 59, and he came off it onto a county road, and that's when he said the thing about the wreck at the loop. And the thing is, that happens. There's a wreck on that stretch about twice a month, so my brain went, okay, and went back to thinking about nothing. I got my phone out to text my mom, and I had no bars, which is also completely normal out there. There are stretches of Angelina County where you could stand in the middle of the road at noon and not get a signal. We drove maybe 5 more minutes, and he stopped talking. That was the first thing I actually noticed. He'd been going on about a truck he was fixing, and then he just quit mid-thing and didn't finish the sentence. Then he slowed down and turned left onto a logging road. It's all timber company land out there, planted pine in rows, with a pipe gate at the road and a cattle guard. The gate was open, which it usually isn't. He said he had to check a feeder, and I said, okay, and my whole body went cold from the middle out, and I said, actually, could you just let me out at the Baptist church? I'll walk from there. He said, it's 2 minutes. I looked in the back seat because I wanted to look anywhere but at him, and there was a folded moving blanket and a roll of orange baling twine, which is the most ordinary thing in the world. Every work truck in East Texas has both of those in it. That's why it took me so long. Nothing in that truck was a clue. There was never going to be a clue. The road had a washout in it about 200 yards in, a rut across the whole track, and he slowed down to about walking pace to get across it. I opened the door and went. I don't remember doing it. I remember the door being open and my feet not being in the truck. Here's the one useful thing I know. Planted pine is in rows. If you run down a row, you can go fast, but you're visible for a long time. So I ran diagonally across the rows, and it's slow and it's horrible. But after about 30 seconds, I was basically invisible. I heard the truck stop. I didn't hear him get out, and I didn't hear him call after me, and I've never figured out what that was. I thought about it a lot for a couple of years. He didn't shout my name. He didn't shout anything. If a man gives a kid a ride and the kid panics and jumps out into the woods at midnight, that man shouts. He gets out and he shouts, because otherwise the kid's mother is calling the sheriff about him by morning. That's not a hunch, that's just what a person would do. I went through briars with bare arms, and I didn't feel a single one of them until I was sitting in a stranger's kitchen. And then I felt all of them at once. I went about 3/4 of a mile and came out on a county road at a house with a porch light and a dog run. And a woman in her 60s opened the door about 4 inches on a chain, which is exactly the right thing to do when a torn-up teenage boy is on your porch at midnight. And before I said one word, she said, "Is it the white truck?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What happened, honey?" "Is it the white truck?" Like I wasn't the first one. She let me in. She called the sheriff's office, and she called my mom at work, and she gave me a glass of milk, which I didn't want and drank all of. The deputy who came out took my statement in her kitchen, and I got about as far as, "A guy from the restaurant, he's a regular, he's got a white Ford," and the deputy said Dale's last name. That's the whole town, right there. I hadn't said it. He said it. So here's the aftermath, and it's the part I actually hate. Nothing happened. That's the legal position, and I understand it. And that's the actual ending. A man gave a kid a ride, the kid got spooked and jumped out on a private logging road. The man says he was checking a feeder, and he does in fact have a lease on that block. And there's no crime in any of that. No charge. Not one. I gave a statement twice. Once in that woman's kitchen and once at the sheriff's office in town, with my mom sitting beside me still in her scrubs. And the second deputy was kind to me and wrote everything down and told me plainly that there was nothing to charge. He didn't brush me off. He explained it. I've never held it against him, and I'm not going to start now. He kept coming in. Not to my shifts, Renata made sure of that, but he kept coming in for another 1.5 years, and he kept calling her ma'am. Then he moved to somewhere outside Shreveport. I don't ride in the passenger seat of anybody's vehicle now. I'm 25 and I drive everywhere. I drive to places I could walk to. Edit. A lot of people asking why the woman said that. I went back and asked her a few months later. She said there'd been talk about that truck out on that road for years, and that nobody had anything you could take to anyone. That's the whole answer. That's all there is. 8 for me, and it's an 8 because of the woman at the door. The man barely registers. It's the one question through the gap in the door from somebody who'd clearly rehearsed it. We're going back to something you can't call the police about now. This one's from a farm in the west of Ireland, and it's the smallest story in this video. Nobody is chased, nothing is seen, and the entire thing turns on a €60 camera strapped to a gate post. The next story is from r/The Truth Is Here, from a user called Drumlin. It's called, "Our dogs stopped going into the top field." My father-in-law is the most boring man in Ireland, and I mean that as the highest compliment I have available. Pater has farmed the same 62 acres outside a village in Leitrim since he was 19. He has never in his life told a story with a twist in it. He watches the weather, he goes to the mart in Carrick, he complains about the price of nitrogen and about the department. And if you asked him about ghosts, he'd look at you the way you'd look at a dog that had started talking. I'm from Dublin. I married Cathal in 2018, and we moved down in 2019 into the old house while Pater's in the bungalow. I'm 34. I do payroll for a company in Sligo, 3 days a week from the kitchen table, and I didn't grow up with any of this, which is why I'm the one writing it down. The people who grew up with it don't write it down. 38 sucklers, drumlins, rushes in half the ground, 1 Massey that Cathal loves more than he loves me, and 2 collies. Nell was 11 and Fly was 9. I'll tell you what that first year was actually like, because I think people imagine something out of a commercial. It's mud. It's getting up at 6:30 in January to break ice on a trough with a sledgehammer. It's the TB test, where a vet comes and you run every animal you own through a crush twice in 3 days. And if one of them fails, your life stops. There's no atmosphere in it. There's no room for atmosphere in it. The top field is 11 acres at the north end. There's a ring fort in the corner of it, which, if you're not from here, is a circular bank of earth and whitethorn. And there are about 40,000 of them in this country, and no farmer touches them. That's not a spooky thing, that's just the arrangement. You plow around it, and you get on with your life. The one thing I noticed in my first year and thought nothing of, Patter never put stock in the top field between St. Patrick's Day and the start of May. I assumed it was rotation. I asked once, and he said the ground's wet up there, and the ground is wet up there. Late March 2022, Cahill sent Fly up to bring in a few cattle, and Fly went to the gate and lay down. If you haven't been around a working collie, I need you to understand that this is not a dog declining a walk. That dog would go into a river in February. That dog would go under a car. Cahill has never once had to ask him twice for anything in 9 years. He lay down at the wall about 6 feet short of the gate, with his head on his paws, and he looked up at Cahill the whole time. Nell wouldn't go either. She stood behind Cahill's leg. We did the sensible things. I checked the trough. I walked the whole field myself in daylight with a stick, all 11 acres, looking for a dead animal, because a rotting badger will do strange things to a dog. Nothing. I checked for a set. I called the neighbor about whether he'd been spreading anything, and he hadn't, and he was a bit put out that I asked. I called the vet. Marie came out twice. She did bloods on both dogs and on 2 of the cattle. Everything was clean. She checked for lead because there's old paint and old batteries in every farmyard in Ireland. Clean. 2 visits and bloods came to about €180, and I'd have paid it 4 times over for something, anything, to come back on a page. There was nothing to test. That's the whole problem. You can't bring a vet a field. Then the cattle. The 10th of April, about 7:30 in the morning, raining the way it rains there. All 38 of them were standing at the bottom wire of the top field, in a block, facing the top corner. Not grazing, not moving. Facing. I watched them from the yard for a bit, and then I got Cahill, and we watched them for a bit. And then I made tea and came back out, and they were still doing it. That was 2.5 hours. I've since read that cattle will bunch and face a dog or a fox, and they will for about 90 seconds. Cahill moved them into the low ground and said nothing at all, and Cahill is not a man who says nothing. I asked him at dinner what he thought it was, and he said, "They're contrary," and put more butter on a potato. And I looked at his hands, and they weren't steady. And I let it go, because I'd been married 3 years, and I already knew the rules in that house without anyone having taught them to me. There's a thing I want to be honest about here. Around then, I started going up to the top field on my own. In the middle of the day, in the sun, with the dogs shut in. 4 or 5 times. I'd walk to the middle of it and stand there like a lunatic, waiting to feel something. And I never felt one single thing. It's a nice field. There's a view of the lake from the top of it. That's the part I can't get across to people. It isn't a horrible place. I'd have had a picnic in it. In the last week of April, something came down to the house. That's when I stopped sleeping properly. Fly started standing between me and the back door in the evenings. Not at the door, between me and the door. And one night, Cahill came in from the yard at about 10, and Fly growled at him, and Cahill stopped in the doorway with his hand still on the handle, and neither of us said anything. And then Fly went and lay under the table. 9 years. He'd never growled at anyone in this family. We had a fox at the hens in March, so we'd bought a trail camera. €60 from a place online, the kind everybody has. I moved it up and strapped it to the gate post of the top field, facing in. Those cameras take a photograph every time something warm moves, and they take 400 a night. And it's rain, rain, a hair, rain, the gate, rain. I went through them at the kitchen table on the 1st of May with a cup of tea. It takes about 40 minutes, and it's the most boring job on a farm. 3:40 in the morning, the 29th of April. Both dogs. 20 feet inside the gate, out in the middle of the field, side by side, facing away from the camera, up toward the corner. Both dogs were in the kitchen. The back door was bolted. I bolted. I bolted it that night, and I unbolted it the next morning at 10 after 7. And there's no dog door, and there's no window open in that house in April. The photograph before it is 3:39. Empty field, rain. The one after it is 3:41. Empty field, rain. I sat there and went back and forth between 3 photographs about 60 times. And then I closed the laptop, and I went out to the shed, and I sat on a bag of meal for a while. I've had every explanation put to me since, and I've had a go at all of them. 2 other dogs that look like ours. There are no other collies within 3 kilometers, and I know every dog in that parish by name. A fault in the camera pulling an old image. It's a €60 camera. It doesn't have anything old on it. The card was blank when I put it in. The one I keep coming back to is that I'm wrong about the bolt, that I didn't bolt the door that night. And honestly, maybe. It was April. I was tired. I do it every night without thinking about it. And a thing you do without thinking about it is exactly the thing you can't swear to. I showed Cahill. He looked at it for a long time, and then he said, "That's the 2 of them all right." And then he went and did the evening. I showed Patter. I put the laptop on his kitchen table in the bungalow, and he looked at it with his glasses up on his head and then down again, and he was quiet for a while. And then he said one sentence. He said, "Leave it so." And he got up and filled the kettle. We fenced it off in May. 11 acres out of 62, and if you don't farm, that's not a gesture, that's money. We rent grazing 3 kilometers away now. Cahill won't talk about it. He just doesn't. I've tried twice, and both times he answered a completely different question. I haven't told my mother. I've told 2 friends, and I could hear both of them being nice to me on the phone. Nell died in September. She was 12 by then, and that's a normal age for a collie, and Marie said her heart, and there's nothing in that, and I'm only telling you because somebody would ask. Fly is grand. Fly is 11 now, and stiff in the mornings, and he still won't go up past the 2nd gate, and nobody in this house asks him to. I left the camera up. I don't know why. It's still on the post, and the strap's gone green. I took the card out in September, and there were nearly 4,000 photographs on it. And then it had filled and stopped, back in May. The last one is the 4th of May, 11 minutes past 4 in the morning. It's the 2 of them at the gate. Right up at it, close enough that Nell's nose is out of focus, looking into the camera. And the gate is shut. 5 out of 10. I know, come at me. It's a 5 because nothing happens and nobody is hurt, and it's the only story in this video I'd honestly defend as a 10 if you argued it well, because that last photograph has been in my head for 3 days. The next story is called, "I've opened the same valve every Sunday for 12 years. I look after a reservoir for a district council in the North Island, and I've done it for 12 years. It's not a big one. It supplies about 4,000 people and a dairy factory, and it sits in a valley at the back of a range about 25 kilometers from town, up a gravel road that the council grades twice a year, and that I drive in a white Hilux with the council crest peeling off the door. The job is levels, screens, dosing, and mowing. I read the levels. I clear slash off the intake screen after rain, which after a big rain is 3 hours of pulling branches out of a grate with a rake while standing in cold water. I check the chlorine, and I log it. I mow the embankment, which is a 2-day job on a slope that has tipped the mower over twice. I set possum traps because possums get into the header tank shed and die in it, and there is no smell on this earth like a possum that has died in a header tank shed in February. I'm on $84,000 a year, which is decent for the job, and about 60% of my working life is alone. I say all that because I want you to have the right picture of the person telling you this. I'm not a guy who goes looking. I have a high-vis vest with my name on it in marker. I have a clipboard. My whole professional life is writing a number in a box twice a day so that 4,000 people can brush their teeth without thinking about me. And the highlight of most weeks is that the mower didn't tip. There are 2 dams, the main one from 1986, which is what supplies the town, and the lower dam, which is from 1958, and which was decommissioned when the new one went in. It's still full. It's a black pond about 300 meters long, with bush right down to the water on the far side, and a concrete apron, and an outlet valve with a wheel on it. On the wall of the pump house at the lower dam, there's a laminated card. It's been laminated at least 3 times because you can see the older card inside the newer one. It says, 15th March to 15th May, Sunday, open outlet valve at dusk, 40 minutes, close. That's it. No reason. I asked, obviously. Day 1, I asked the guy training me, a fella called Ross, who was 63 and about 3 months off retirement, and Ross said, "It's on the schedule." And I said, "Yeah, but why?" And Ross said, "It's on the schedule, mate." That's an answer. Technically. So I want to tell you about the first Sunday in April, my first year, and then I want to tell you what I did about it for the following decade. And then I want to be honest with you about how this ends, because I know what you're here for. It gets dark early in April there, and it gets dark fast, because the range is to the west and the sun goes behind it, and that's your lot. I got up there at 10 after 8, turned the wheel, which takes about 40 turns, and squeals. The water goes out through the old line, and it makes a noise like a bathtub emptying, but bigger, and it goes on for the whole 40 minutes. I sat on the tailgate with a thermos, because that's 40 minutes of nothing. And on the far embankment, on the other side of the water, there were people standing. I want to be careful here, because this is the part where you decide whether I'm worth listening to. They're on the far bank, about 120 meters off, in front of the bush, standing. There were 14 of them that first time. They're not doing anything. They don't move. They don't come toward the water. They're just standing there facing across, the way people stand at the edge of a parking lot watching something being unloaded. And I did the first thing anybody does, which is shout. I stood up on the tailgate and I called out, "Hey!" And it went across the water the way sound does at dusk, and I heard it come back off the concrete apron. Not one of them moved, not a head. And that's when it stopped being a group of trampers who'd come down the wrong track, which is what I'd been telling myself for about 90 seconds. The valve was still open. I didn't run because you can't leave an outlet valve open on a decommissioned line, and my entire training is that you don't walk away from an open valve. And so I sat back down on that tailgate for 26 more minutes with a thermos I didn't drink, and then I got up and turned the wheel 40 times to shut it, with my back to the water, which took about a minute and a half. When I turned around, the bank was empty. Then I got in the truck and I drove down the hill much too fast, and I sat in my kitchen until about 2 in the morning. The next day I told my supervisor. I told him properly, in his office, with the door shut, and I was ready to lose the job over it. He listened to the whole thing, and then he said, Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's the entire response I got. Yeah. And then he asked me whether I'd got the chlorine login. So then I spent 12 years doing what any reasonable person would do, and I'm going to list it, because I don't want anybody in the comments telling me I should have looked into it. I photographed it. 9 different Sundays, phone, and then a proper camera with a long lens. There's nothing in any of the photographs. Not a blur, not a smudge. Bank, bush, water. I went to the district archive in town and read the minutes for the whole scheme from 1956 to 1962. The valve instruction is in the 1958 commissioning schedule, written by an engineer whose name I have, and it's listed under silt scouring of the old line. And it's mundane, and it makes engineering sense for a system that stopped existing in 1986. It got carried forward through 3 rewrites because nobody ever takes anything off a schedule. I looked for a drowned village. There isn't one. The lower dam flooded about 7 hectares of gorse and 2 paddocks, and the farmhouse that was there was moved, physically moved, in 1957, and the family that lived in it had 8 kids, and the youngest one is alive, and I've spoken to her on the phone. Nothing happened there. There's no accident. 2 men were hurt building it, neither seriously. I asked people who'd properly know the history of that valley, and I asked politely, and I was told there's nothing recorded there. I called Ross, 4 years in. He was in Tauranga by then. I said, "Ross, the lower dam." And he laughed, and not in a nasty way, and he said, "Oh, they're still there, are they?" And then he asked about my kids. And that is everything. That's honestly all of it. I know what a story like this is supposed to do now. There's supposed to be a document. Somebody's supposed to have covered something up in '58, and I'm supposed to find the file, and then it all clicks, and you go, Oh, there's no file. I looked for 12 years. There's a valve, and there's a card, and there's 14 people on a bank, and there's no explanation, and there was never going to be one. And I've made a kind of peace with that, which I'm aware is not entirely healthy. Nothing has ever happened. Nothing has come across the water. In 12 years, the number has been 14 every single time except twice, and both times it was 13, and I don't have a theory about that either. The only thing I've changed in 12 years is the thermos. I used to take a cup of tea up in a mug. Now I take a thermos, because a mug goes cold in 40 minutes, and because a thermos gives your hands something to do. And if you want the honest emotional content of this post, that's it. It's a man buying a better flask. I didn't tell my wife for 5 years. When I did tell her, she asked me to apply for the depot job in town, and I said I would, and I didn't. And that sat between us for about a year and a half. It's all right now. It's not resolved, it's just old. I've got 6 years to retirement. I'll do it every Sunday from the 15th of March to the 15th of May until then. And then somebody else will. And nobody will tell them why either, because there isn't a why to tell them. The forecast for Sunday's fine. I'll be up at the lower dam at about 10 after 8 with a thermos and a flashlight I won't turn on. Edit. To everyone asking what happens if I don't open it, I don't know, and I'm not going to find out at 59 years old with a mortgage. Somebody asked if I've ever waved. Yes, once, in my 3rd year. Nothing waved back, and I felt like an idiot for 2 weeks. If you're enjoying the video, support the channel with a like and a subscribe. And we're moving on to the next story. 7 out of 10, and it's the only 7 I'd defend as the best written thing in the video. Nothing happens in it. That's the achievement. This next one is real. It's American, it takes place in an office, and it's the one I keep thinking about at stoplights. It's told by somebody who wasn't the victim and wasn't the man, and partway through you'll figure out why he's the one telling it. The next story is from r/Let's Not Meet, from a user called Adherence. It's called, "A Guy at My Work Was Stalking a Coworker, and I Helped Him Do It." There's a thing I did at a job in 2019 that I've never told anyone outside of a police interview room, and I'm going to tell it in order, because if I tell you the end first, you'll stop listening to the middle, and the middle is the part that matters. I was a workforce analyst at a claims call center in a business park off the interstate south of Portland. 410 seats. If you've never worked in one, the whole building runs on a screen. Everybody's status is on it. Available, on a call, after call work, break, lunch, coaching. Your adherence to your schedule is a percentage, and it gets discussed with you. My job was the schedule. I built it, I published it, I moved it around when people called in sick. $62,000 a year and a badge that got me into a room with 2 other people in it. And very good coffee, because they gave the analysts the good coffee, and that tells you everything about call centers. Marisol was on Team 4. 31 from Gresham did the Spanish queue, so she took about 40% more calls than anybody else and never once complained about it out loud. She grew succulents in little pots on her desk, and she sold them, on the side, in a local buy and sell group, and people would pick them up off her porch. That matters later. Wes was on Team 4 as well. Quiet. 35, maybe? Fine at the job. Ate lunch in his car, which about 100 people in that building did. Called me boss in a way that wasn't sarcastic. If you'd asked me to name the 50 people in that building most likely to be a problem, I wouldn't have gotten to Wes, and I've had 6 years to be honest with myself about whether that's true. And it is. That's the whole cast. That's it. Here's what I want to get across before anything happens. She did everything right. Every single thing. I've read enough of these to know that the commenters always find something the woman should have done, so let me get out in front of it. In March, she told her team lead that Wes was in the parking garage when her shift ended, 3 times in a week, and that it wasn't on his way. Her team lead escalated it that day. HR moved his desk to the other end of the floor and put a note in his file. In April, he sent her 41 messages on the internal chat over a weekend, and she screenshotted every one and reported it Monday morning. and he got a written warning and lost chat privileges outside work hours. In May, she went to the police and started the paperwork for a stalking protective order, which in Oregon is a real thing an ordinary person can get without a lawyer. She changed the time she left. She parked in a different garage 2 blocks away and paid for it herself, $70 a month, on a call center wage. She did all of that in 10 weeks while taking 130 calls a day about somebody's hail damage. And I want to say something about the company, too, because the easy version of this story is that HR did nothing. And that isn't what happened. They moved him. They wrote him up. They pulled his chat. They had a lawyer on a call about it in April. Everybody in that chain did the next correct thing on the list in front of them, and the list ran out. There's no box on any form for "this man is somehow always where she is." And every single week, Wes was outside her apartment building anyway. That's what nobody could work out. Because the man did not know where she lived. That's what everybody assumed, and it's wrong. He'd had her address since January, off the buy and sell group, from a porch pickup, and the police established that in about 2 hours. The address was never the mystery. The mystery was the timing. Because he was never there when she was home with her sister. He was never there on the nights her ex came to pick up the dog. He was there when she was alone, and he was there when she'd be coming home at 9:40 instead of 5:40, and he was there on the Tuesday she swapped shifts with a woman named Deb at 11 in the morning with 2 hours' notice. Nobody could explain that. The detective couldn't explain it. Her team lead couldn't. HR thought he had someone in the building feeding him, and they were right, and they never found them, because the person they were looking for was in the room during the meeting where they said it. It was me. I'm going to describe exactly what that looked like, because I think most people picture something dramatic, and it wasn't. Over about 4 months, Wes asked me maybe 30 questions. Not in a row, not in a way you'd remember. He'd come by my desk with a coffee and go, "Hey boss, quick one. Is Team 4 on the late shift next Thursday?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And he'd go, "Cool, thanks. Is Marisol on the Spanish queue Friday, or is that Danny? Is anybody covering the 11 to 8 on Tuesday? Did the schedule change get published yet? Because so-and-so's asking." That's my job. That's literally the thing I was paid $62,000 to know. People asked me those questions 40 times a day. There was a spreadsheet on the shared drive that half the floor could open. He never asked where she lived. He never asked for her number. He never said her name in a way that would have made me look up. He asked me about a schedule, and I answered him about a schedule. And every time I answered him about a schedule, I told a man where a woman was going to be alone. I found out in the detective's office. She had a timeline printed out, 12 dates, and she asked me to confirm the shift pattern for each one because I was the one who'd built them. And I was helping. I was being useful. I was on date 6 when my hand stopped working because I could remember the conversation. I asked for a minute, and I went out into the hallway and I stood by a water fountain. And then I went back in and I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to tell you before you ask me." She didn't react. I want that on the record too, because I'd braced for something, and what I got was a woman writing on a legal pad who said, "Okay, thank you, keep going," and then took me back through all 12 dates a second time. Professionals are very frightening when they don't react. The one thing she asked me, right at the end, was whether he'd ever asked me about anybody else's schedule in that same way. And I sat there and went through 4 months in my head, and the answer was no, not once. 30 questions, 1 name. I went back to the office that night, and I pulled every chat log between me and Wes, 4 months of them, and I printed them on the office printer at 10 at night. 38 pages. I put them in a manila envelope, and I drove them to the precinct in the morning and handed them to the front desk. And I knew exactly what it was going to do to me. And I did it anyway. And I'd like some credit for that. And I'm aware that I'm asking for it. He pleaded to felony stalking in November. He served 13 months. There's a permanent order. Marisol is fine. That's the actual end of the story. And I want it in bold. Except I can't do bold, so she is fine. She left that company in 2020, and she's a supervisor somewhere better, and she's fine. I was walked out in December. Not fired exactly. There was a conversation about how there was no policy I'd broken and no way I could stay. And both of those things were true. I got 8 weeks. I emailed her once, in 2020. 2 paragraphs, no excuses in it, I checked. She replied with 4 words, and I'm not going to put them here because they belong to her, and they weren't cruel, and they weren't forgiveness, and she was completely entitled to both. Here's what I actually think about now, 6 years on. 30 ordinary questions from a colleague across 4 months spread out, each one of them the exact question 40 other people asked me that same week. The system that lets a call center run is the system he used. There isn't a policy for it. I've looked. 8, and it's an 8 for one line. 30 ordinary questions. That's a man being helpful at work. Okay, and now the long one. It's the biggest single block in the video. A guy in Iowa who buys abandoned storage units at auction, and it starts with a $15 camera, and I'm going to say nothing else except that the second half of it is not about him. The next story is from r/no sleep, from a user called Lean Auction. It's called, I bought a storage unit in Iowa and developed the film that was in it. The camera was a Canon AE1 with a cracked prism, the wrong lens cap on it, and a strap somebody had repaired with electrical tape. I'd have put it at $15 at a flea market, and I priced it that way in my head standing in the doorway of a unit I'd just paid $350 for. I want to walk you through how these auctions work, because most of what people think they know about it comes from television, and it's wrong. And the way it actually works is the reason this happened at all. I'm 26 now. I was 24 then. I work at a tire and alignment shop outside Waterloo, Iowa, and about 2 Saturdays a month, my Uncle Ray and I go to storage lien auctions, which is what a facility does when somebody stops paying. In this state, they have to send notices, and then they have to publish it in a newspaper, an actual paper newspaper, with the tenant's name in it, and then they can sell the contents. Here's the part that matters. You don't get to go in. The manager cuts the lock and rolls the door up, and you get about 5 minutes standing at the threshold with a flashlight, and there might be a dozen of you taking turns, and you can't step over the line, and you can't open a box. You bid on shapes. You bid on the corner of a good toolbox, and the way the boxes are stacked, because people who stack neatly usually owned better stuff. Ray taught me that, and Ray has been right about it for 10 years. Most of it is junk. I want to be honest about the economics, because people think this is a treasure hunt. Out of 10 units, you make money on 6. You break even on 3, and one of them is a 10 by 15 full of somebody's mattress and 40 bags of clothes that you now have to pay to take to the landfill, which is $52 a ton. The one I'm talking about was a 5 by 10 in a facility off the highway, sold in October 2023, $350 cash. Neat. Boxes stacked square. A red Craftsman toolbox that I sold on Marketplace for $220, so I was almost back to even before I'd opened anything, which is why I was in a good mood for about a week. I want to give you one more thing about these auctions before I move on, because it's the thing that makes the rest of it sit wrong in my stomach. You're buying a dead person's house, in boxes most of the time. Not always. Sometimes it's a divorce. Sometimes it's somebody who moved for work and stopped caring. But a lot of the time somebody died and nobody in the family knew there was a unit, and the notices went to an address where nobody lives, and 6 months later I'm standing in the doorway with a flashlight deciding what a toolbox is worth. Ray and I have a rule about that. Photographs, letters, dog tags, anything with a name on it goes in a box in Ray's garage, and twice a year he makes an effort to find somebody. He's succeeded 3 times in 10 years. He keeps the thank you card from one of them on the fridge. I'm telling you that so you understand why I developed the film at all. It wasn't curiosity. It's just the thing we do. There were 3 boxes of camera gear. 2 bodies, 5 lenses, filters, a light meter, and a plastic grocery sack with 11 rolls of exposed film in it, rubber banded together. Now, the reason any of this happened is that I developed black and white film in my bathroom. I have since I was 19. It's not a personality, It's a hobby I got off a guy at work, and it costs about $5 a roll and takes an hour. And I like it because you can't rush it, and nothing else in my life is like that. I should explain the process, quickly, because it's why I can be so certain about a couple of things later. You load the film onto a spiral reel inside a black bag with your hands, blind. You put the reel in a tank, and from that point on, it's daylight safe. Then it's developer, stop bath, fixer, and a wash. About half an hour of pouring chemicals in and out on a timer. Then you hang the strip in the shower with a clip on the bottom so it doesn't curl, and you wait 2 hours and you don't touch it. And if you touch it, you'll put a fingerprint on somebody's wedding forever. The point is that nobody hands you anything. There's no envelope, no counter, no kid at a lab. It's your bathroom, your hands, your chemistry, in the dark. And then a wet strip hanging over your bathtub. So on the Sunday, I developed the first 3 rolls. Keep the bathroom in your head. It comes back. The first rolls were somebody's life, and it was completely ordinary and honestly kind of lovely. A woman in a kitchen with wallpaper, a dog, a church, a car that I'd put in the early 90s, 2 kids on a swing set. The film stock was Kodak Plus X, which they stopped making in 2011, so I already knew I was looking at something old. Rolls 4, 5, and 6, more of the same. Somebody's 20-year documentation of a completely regular family, and I was already thinking about how I'd try to find them, because that's a thing people in this hobby do. You develop a stranger's film, and you try to get it back to them. It's nice. It's the good part of it. Roll 7 was my street. I want to be really precise about how that went because it wasn't a jolt. It was slow and stupid. I hung the strip up to dry in the shower, and I looked at it and I thought, that's a Dutch colonial with a bad porch? That looks like the Fergusons. And then I looked at the next frame and thought, that's because it is the Fergusons. And then I stood there for a while. 11 frames on that roll were my parents' street in Evansdale, taken from across the road from what I'd guess is a parked car at about chest height through an open window. 4 of them are my parents' house. Here's how I knew they were recent, and I checked all of it before I did anything else, because I sat down and made myself be a reasonable person about it. The Fergusons put a vinyl fence in during the summer of 2022. It's in the picture. My dad's truck is in the picture, and he bought it in 2021. The stop sign at the corner got replaced after somebody hit it in 2020, and the new one has a different post. So, film that stopped being manufactured in 2011 in a camera that was inside a padlocked unit that had been delinquent since 2021, showing a fence that went up in 2022. I know. Believe me, I went at that from every angle I could think of for about 2 weeks. I called the lab in Cedar Rapids to ask if they'd ever handled that film, and they hadn't. And they couldn't have, because I developed it myself, in my bathroom, out of a plastic sack I opened myself. There's no lab. There's no mix-up. I'm the only person who touched that film, and I'm not making that claim because it makes a better story. I'm making it because it's the thing that removed every explanation I had. The facility manager wouldn't tell me the tenant's name, which is correct and legal, and I don't blame him. But the lien sale has to be published in the paper, with the name, and the paper is online, and it took me about 10 minutes. The tenant was a man named Gene Ostrander, 68. He died in March 2021 at an address in Cedar Falls, which is how a storage unit ends up delinquent, and there's a 2-line obituary with no photograph and no survivors listed. So I've got photographs of my parents' house that couldn't have been taken before 2022 in a unit belonging to a man who died in 2021. This is the part where I did the thing I'm proud of. I called my dad, and I told him all of it, on the phone, at 11 at night, and I didn't soften it. Then I drove over. Then, in the morning, we called the Evansdale police, and we didn't say anything about film stock or dead men because I'm not an idiot. We said, we have photographs of the inside and outside of this house taken by an unknown person. Here they are. And they took it seriously, immediately, because photographs of the inside of a house are a burglary and not a ghost story. The inside. Yeah, I skipped that on purpose. Roll 8 is the kitchen. From the hallway. At night, with available light, which means a long exposure, which means the camera was held still on something for probably a full second. The dish rack is in it. My mother's dish rack, with the plates in the order she puts them in. Roll 9 is my parents' bedroom door, closed, from about 6 feet away. There's no roll of anybody's face. Nobody is in any of them. That's the thing that got me, more than if there had been somebody. It's a house with nobody in it, photographed by somebody standing in it. We changed the locks that day. Both doors and the garage side door, $180. We put 2 cameras up. My mother stayed at my aunt's for 2 weeks. My dad slept in the front room with a shotgun for a week, which he will deny and which he absolutely did. The police pulled what they could on Ostrander. No connection to my parents, no record. He'd worked for the county roads department for 31 years, retired, and lived alone. Nobody who knew him had a bad word, which is a sentence I've come to find pretty unbearable. And that was it. That's where it was going to end. Because you can't investigate a dead man. There was no case. There was a report number and a very nice officer named Brianna who called me twice to check in, and that's more than most people get. She did ask me the obvious question, and she asked it kindly, which was whether there was any chance I'd taken them, whether I did photography, whether I'd been at the house, whether maybe I'd shot a roll and forgotten. And that's a completely fair question, and I'd have asked it too. I answered it honestly. I don't shoot my parents' street from a parked car at chest height, and I didn't own that camera before October. The second time she called, she told me they'd checked whether Ostrander had ever worked that road for the county. He hadn't. Different district for 31 years. Then I developed the last 2 rolls. I'd left them, 10 and 11. They sat in a sack on top of my microwave for 6 weeks because I didn't want to know. Roll 10 is the same street from 1994. I can date that one too. The Ferguson's house has the old porch. There's a car in the driveway that I had to look up, an Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. And there's a campaign sign in a yard 3 doors down that I could read with a loop. Same spot in the road, same height, same house. My parents bought that house in 2006. We are not the point. That's the thing I had to sit with. Whatever this is, it isn't about my family. It isn't about me. It isn't about my mother's dish rack. We're the people who happen to be inside a house that somebody has been photographing since before I was born. I went back through rolls 1 to 6 after that, the nice ones, the woman in the kitchen and the dog and the church. I'd looked at them as somebody's family album. I looked at them again as somebody's work. They're all exteriors, every single one. The woman in the kitchen is through a window. The kids on the swing set are from behind a hedge, and once you've seen the hedge, you can't unsee it, because it's in the bottom 1/8 of the frame in 6 photographs, and no person on this earth stands behind a hedge to photograph their own children. There is not one photograph in 11 rolls taken by somebody who was welcome. That took me about a week to be able to say out loud, and I said it to Ray in his kitchen, and Ray put his coffee down and went and stood at the sink for a minute with his back to me. There have been 3 other families in that house. I found 2 of them. One is a woman in her 70s in Waverly who was polite and told me nothing and then hung up. And I've thought about that hang-up a lot. The other family moved to Arizona, and the son I spoke to was about my age, and he said, and I'm quoting him because I wrote it down, "Is this about the pictures?" That's the whole conversation I got. He wouldn't say anything else, and he asked me not to call again, and I've respected that. I've thought a lot about the woman in Waverly. She was polite for about 90 seconds. She asked me how I'd got her number, and I told her, honestly, that it was on a property record. She asked me what my name was, and I told her. And then I said the word photographs, and there was a gap of about 4 seconds, and then she said, "I'm going to go now," and she hung up. 4 seconds. That's a person deciding something, not a person confused. I haven't called her again. I've picked the phone up twice. My parents sold the house in June 2024. They took $91,000 less than they should have because they sold it fast and took the first offer they got, and because my dad wanted it done. They're in a smaller place in Cedar Falls now, on 1 floor, and my mother likes it. and my father has aged about 10 years in 2. That's the cost. There isn't a scarier thing at the end of this. That's it. 2 people in their 60s who lost about a third of their retirement because of a plastic sack of film. I don't do the auctions anymore. Ray still does. Ray thinks the whole thing has a normal explanation, and Ray has never once asked me what the explanation is, and those 2 facts sit next to each other in a way I find interesting. Here's the last thing, and it's the only thing I have that you can actually check, and I'd rather end on something you could hold than on a feeling. A roll of 35mm film gives you 36 frames. If you load it well in a changing bag, you can sometimes steal a 37th, and every so often a badly cut roll gives you 38, and every person who develops film has had that happen once. Roll 11 gave me 39. I counted them wet, hanging in the shower, and then I counted them dry, and then I made Ray count them in his kitchen without telling him why, and he said 39 and asked me if I'd got a deal on it. Frames 37, 38, and 39 are my parents' back door, from outside, in daylight. The same shot 3 times, and in each one the photographer is standing closer, and in the last one you can't see the door frame anymore. People keep telling me to burn them. I understand the instinct, and I'm not going to. If I burn them, then in about 10 years I'll be a guy at a bar telling a story with nothing to show. And there'll be a version of me who thinks he made it up, and I've watched what that does to a person. There's a strip of plastic in my closet that means it happened. I gave the prints to the police. I kept the negatives because they're mine, and because I wanted something in my hand. They're in an archival sleeve in a folder on the shelf in my closet, in a house 40 minutes from where any of this happened. You can hold the strip up to a window and count the frames. It's 39. It's still 39. Edit. I'm not going to post scans, and I've thought about it. My parents' address is legible in 2 of them. To the people telling me the camera has nothing to do with it and I should check the film for edge codes, I did. Roll 11's edge code is 1998. 9 out of 10, and I'll take arguments down to a 7 from anyone who thinks the 39 frames is a step too far. For me, it's the 5 words from the guy in Arizona. All right? No supernatural in this next one at all. It's from Poland. It's told by a man who is not the person who did anything, and the reason he's finally posting it is a piece of construction equipment. Listen to the first minute properly, because you get the whole story twice. The next story is from r/True Scary Stories, from a user called Camilla Neolum. It's called, They Started Draining the Quarry in April. I've never told this to my wife, and I've been married for 14 years, and I'm about to tell it to strangers on the internet, so you can decide for yourself what kind of man that makes me. I'm going to start somewhere that will seem like the wrong place. The summer of 2002, in a town in Lower Silesia that I'm not going to name, there was a flooded granite quarry about 3 kilometers out on the road to the next village, and every teenager within 20 kilometers swam in it. It's the water. If you've never seen one, the water in an old granite quarry is a green you don't get anywhere else, and it's clear enough that you can see maybe 6 or 7 meters down, and then it just goes to nothing. Black. It's about 60 meters deep in the middle. Everybody knew that number, and nobody knew where they'd got it from. There was a ledge on the east side about 4 meters up, and you jumped off it, and the water in July was so cold it locked your chest for 2 seconds when you went under. And there was always a bike lying in the grass, and somebody's radio playing Eska, and a plastic bag of Ziviettes cooling in the shallows on a rope. That summer I was 18. Merrick was 18. Evelina was 17, and I was in love with her the way you are at that age, which is to say completely and uselessly. We were there 4 or 5 days a week from June until the middle of September. That's the memory. Hold on to it. It's a good one, and it's mine, and I've had to hand it back. Merrick was my closest friend from the age of 6. Our mothers worked together at the school. He was funnier than me, better looking than me, worse at everything academic, and he had an older brother, Tomek, who was 24 and had a job driving for a haulage company and an Opel Astra that we all thought was the greatest object in Europe. October 2001, which is the autumn before that summer, a man went missing from a village about 7 kilometers away. Jan, I'm going to use his first name only because his family are real people and one of them is on Facebook. He was 52. He drank. He'd walked home along that road at night his entire adult life. He didn't come home, and after about 3 weeks, the talk in both villages settled on the thing that talk always settled on in Poland in 2001, which is that he'd gone to Germany for work, or Holland. Somebody's cousin had done exactly that and sent money back after 3 months. Nobody looked very hard. I want to be clear that I'm not accusing anyone of laziness. In our part of the country in that decade, a middle-aged man disappearing and turning up in Hamburg was not a strange thing. It was the most normal thing there was. Now, Vigilia, Christmas Eve, 2003. I was 19. Marek and I were sitting in his brother's car outside the church with the engine off because we'd been drinking and neither of us wanted to go in. And Marek was crying, and I had never seen him cry. And he told me. He said that in October 2001 he'd been in the car with Tomek coming back from a wedding in another town, and it was raining. And Tomek had been drinking, and a man came off the shoulder on that road at night in a dark coat. He said they stopped. He said they got out. He said they stood there for what he thought was 10 minutes and might have been 2. And then he said what they did, which was that they put him in the trunk and they drove to the quarry. And they took the top road, and they put the car in the water with him in it. And on the 29th of October, Tomek reported the car stolen from outside a bar in town. And then he was sick out of the door of a different car, 2 years later, on Christmas Eve, in a church parking lot. And I sat there, and I didn't say anything for a long time, and the thing that finally came out of my mouth was not what you'd expect. I didn't say, why? I didn't say, are you serious? I said, when? And he said, the end of October, 2001. Now go back to the beginning of this post. June, July, August, September, 2002. 4 or 5 days a week. The ledge on the east side. Evelina on a towel with her hair wet. The bag of beer on a rope in the shallows. Marek in the water with me, 20 times, 30 times, that whole summer. Doing the thing where you go down as far as you can until your ears hurt, and then turn and look up at the light. That whole summer he knew. He was in the water, and he knew. That's the part I've never been able to put down in 22 years. Not the road, not the trunk, not the confession. The summer. I have one good memory from being 18, and it has a car in the bottom of it, and I didn't know that until I was 19. And now, I can't have the memory without the car. I need to tell you the next part carefully, because this is where every person who reads this decides what they think of me. I didn't sit on it. I told my father 3 days later. My father is not a coward, and he didn't tell me to be quiet. He said, "Are you certain?" And I said no, and he said, "Then we go anyway." In February 2004, we went to the police station in town, and I gave a statement. It took 2.5 hours, and a woman typed it. I named Marek. I named Tomek. I named the road, the month, the quarry, and the make of the car. They interviewed Marek in March. He denied it completely. He said he'd been extremely drunk on Vigilia, that he'd been retelling a story he'd heard somewhere, that I'd taken it seriously, and it had got out of hand, and he apologized to them for wasting their time. There was no evidence of anything. Jan was, on paper, a man who had probably gone abroad, and there was no case that he'd died at all. The car was on record as stolen. And a flooded quarry 60 meters deep is not a thing anybody sends divers into on the word of a 19-year-old with no proof. And I understand that better now at 41 than I did at 19, because I've since had a job and a budget, and I know what it costs to send men underwater. The officer treated me decently. He wrote it all down. He gave me his card. Nothing happened. I want to say one thing here about my father, because he's dead and nobody else is going to say it. He was a foreman at a furniture factory. He had 3 years more schooling than his own father, and he thought the police were basically for other people. and he put on a shirt to come with me, and he sat in that hallway for 2.5 hours. And when we came out, he bought me a coffee from a machine and said, "Whatever happens now, we did the right thing at the right time." It cost him his job. Tomek's employer was one of the 2 haulage companies in that town, and everybody knew everybody. Nothing you could point at. Just a man in his 50s whose last decade of working life went a little harder. And what happened to me is that it ended. Merrick never spoke to me again. Neither did about 9 other people. In a town that size, the story going around wasn't, "A boy told the police what his friend confessed." It was, "A boy tried to sink the Novak brothers over a girl." Evelina's mother forbade her to see me, and Evelina didn't fight it very hard, which at 19 felt like the worst thing in the whole story, and which I now understand was the smallest. I left in 2005. Wrocław first, then Poznan, where I still live, and I got a technical qualification and then finished a degree at night, and I have a good life and 2 kids. I haven't been in that town for more than 3 days at a stretch since I turned 21. Merrick died in 2023, cancer, and quickly, at 39. I went to the funeral because his mother asked me to and because I wanted to, and both of those are true. At the cemetery, his mother took my hand in both of hers. She's known me since I was 6, and she looked at me for a long time and said one sentence. She said, "You should have kept going." She knew. She always knew. And then she let go of my hand and turned to the next person. Okay, here's why I'm writing this now, and it isn't guilt, and it isn't the anniversary of anything. In 2024, a development company bought the quarry and the land around it. They're putting 160 houses there, and the quarry is going to be a feature, which means a shoreline, which means the level has to come down about 14 meters. They started draining in April. It's slow, much slower than you'd think. I get the local news through a Facebook group I've never posted in. They've had 11 meters out. So far, they've brought up 2 motorbikes, a washing machine, a monstrous quantity of bottles, and half a caravan that nobody can explain. The ledge we jumped off is 15 meters above the water now. It looks completely wrong. It's a gray shelf sticking out of the side of a pit, and it's impossible to imagine anyone jumping off it. And I jumped off it 300 times. There's another 3 meters to come, and then it stops, because a landscape lake has to be a lake. And it's 60 meters deep in the middle, and the car isn't sitting neatly on the shelf where everybody used to swim. So it's entirely possible that they'll bring it down to the level they want, landscape the banks, build 160 houses, and nothing will ever come up. And I'll spend the rest of my life sitting in a parking lot on a hill. I've made my peace with that being the outcome. I have not made my peace with anything else in this story. I drive out there every second or third weekend, 4 hours each way. I park on the top road where you can see the whole pit, and I sit in the car for about an hour, and then I drive home, and I tell my wife I'm going to see my mother, and sometimes I actually do stop in and see my mother. Jan's daughter is 51. She lives in Legnica. She has a business selling window frames, and there's a phone number on the website. I wrote it on a card in March. It's in my wallet, behind my ID, folded once so it fits. I take it out at stoplights sometimes, and I look at it, and I put it back. 7 out of 10, and I know that's low for how heavy it is. It's a 7 because it doesn't come for you in the dark. It just sits on your chest in the daytime for a couple of weeks. 2 left. This one's from Australia, from a guy who drives a road train across the Nullarbor. And the entire horror of it is a legal document he has to fill in by hand. Nothing chases anybody. He just arrives late. The next story is from r/glitch_in_the_matrix from a user called 90 Miles Straight. It's called, "There are 87 minutes missing from my work diary, and I can prove it." I don't believe in any of this. I want that at the top because I've read this subreddit for years, the way you'd read a horoscope. And I'd like you to know I've spent 4 years trying to get a boring answer, and I've got most of one, and not all of one. I drive a B-double, 50-odd tons loaded, Perth to Adelaide and back, which is 2,700 kilometers each way, and most of it across the Nullarbor. 22 years, 3 companies, no accidents, 1 speeding fine in 2009 that I still think was rubbish. I need to explain the work diary because everything I've got hangs off it. If you drive heavy vehicles in this country, you keep a written work diary. Not an app, a book, in duplicate, and you fill it in by hand in 15-minute blocks. Every rest, every start, every finish, odometer readings, location. It's a legal document. Police and the regulator can pull you up at a checking station and go through it. And if it doesn't add up, you're fined. And if it really doesn't add up, you can lose the license you feed your family with. I filled that book in 6 days a week for 22 years. I fill it in before I move and after I stop. It's the most automatic thing I do apart from breathing. Now, the 90-mile straight between Kaiguna and Baladonia is 146 kilometers of road with not one bend in it. It's the longest straight stretch in Australia, and there's a sign at each end so you know. There's nothing on it. No towns, no turnoffs to speak of. No fuel. 2 roadhouses at either end, and that's your lot. The 11th of March, 2021. I pulled into Kaiguna at 11:40 at night, took a 15, wrote it in the book, bought a coffee, and rolled out at 11:58. I got to Baladonia at 20 past 3 in the morning. That drive is about 2 hours. And here's the thing, and this is why I'm not writing a post about falling asleep. I wasn't tired. I'd had 10 hours in a bunk that day. I didn't feel a gap. I didn't come to. There was no moment of going, where am I? I drove the straight. I saw the sign at the end of it. I pulled in. I looked at the clock, and the clock was wrong. So I did what any driver would do, which is assume the clock is broken, and then look at my phone, and then look at the roadhouse clock, and then stand next to my truck in the cold for a bit. Here's why I couldn't let it go, and it's not spooky. It's paperwork. An unrecorded 90-minute stop is a serious problem in that book. If a copper opens it and the times don't reconcile with the odometer, that's on me. So the next morning I did the thing that has caused me 4 years of grief, which is that I rang the office and asked them to pull the telematics. Every truck in that fleet has a tracker on it. The company can see where you are, how fast, when the engine's on, when the park brake's on, fuel burn, the lot. It's there so they can tell you off. I asked for my own data. The bloke in the office thought I was mad and sent it anyway. The truck was stationary for 87 minutes, engine running, park brake on. On the 90-mile straight, about 60 kilometers in, which is a place with a road and dirt and salt bush and absolutely nothing else. No bay, no rest area, no reason. And the odometer's fine. The kilometers are exactly right for that leg. The fuel's right, allowing for the idle. I didn't drive anywhere extra. I stopped my truck in the middle of nowhere, put the brake on, and sat there for an hour and a half, and I have no memory of any of it. I want you to know what that cost me before I go on, because I think people imagine that this sort of thing happens in a vacuum. The regulator got involved. Not because of anything mysterious, because I now had documented evidence that my work diary didn't match my movements. I copped a fine, $900 and change. I got put on a monitoring plan for 6 months, and I had 2 interviews about fatigue, where a very reasonable young woman asked me questions off a sheet, and I sat there and gave answers that made me sound like a liar, because the true answer is not on that sheet. My wife thought I'd had a stroke. That's a real thing she thought for 3 weeks. And it's not a stupid thing to think. So I went and got the lot done. GP, then a neurologist in Perth, MRI, 24-hour EEG with the wires on, blood work, sleep study with the mask. All clean, every bit of it. $2,200 of clean. The neurologist was a good bloke, and he didn't laugh at me. He said the honest thing, which was that a normal scan doesn't prove nothing happened. It just means he can't find it. And that if it happened again, I should come back. I haven't gone back. I'm aware of how that looks, and I want to head off the obvious one, because it's the first thing anybody says. Microsleeps. Fatigue. I know exactly what a microsleep is. I've done the courses 6 times, and a microsleep is 4 seconds and the truck keeps rolling and you wake up in the gravel with your heart going. It is not 87 minutes with the park brake pulled on and the engine idling in a place a person would choose to stop. Second time was the 22nd of April, 6 weeks later, same stretch, going the other way. 41 minutes. And this time, I got something. Not much. I remember the engine note dropping, which it does when you come off the throttle, and I remember thinking the air conditioning smelled different, colder, like a cold room rather than like a truck. And I remember somebody on the UHF channel 40, a bloke's voice, unhurried, saying something in the middle of a sentence like I'd tuned in halfway. That's it. That's all I've got out of 4 years, and I know it's nothing. I wrote it down at the roadhouse on the back of a docket in case it went, and I've still got the docket in the folder with everything else, and reading my own handwriting from that morning is not a nice experience. The letters go big at the end of it, so for the third one, I was ready. I bought a dash cam that records continuously to a card, the sort that keeps rolling and writes over itself after 8 hours, and I put a big card in it so it wouldn't. The 19th of September, 52 minutes. The footage is there. There's no gap in it. That's the bit people always ask about, so I'll get it out of the way. The file is continuous. The timestamp runs the whole way through. Nothing is corrupted. It's 52 minutes of a stationary road at night. Headlights on the bitumen, the white line going away, the edge of the salt bush. Insects. That's it for 52 minutes, and I've watched all of it more than once, which is a thing I'd recommend nobody do. At about the 22-minute mark, something crosses the light a long way up the road, right at the edge of what the headlights reach. It's there for less than a second, and I'm not going to tell you what it is because I don't know what it is. And anybody who tells you they can identify something at that distance on a cheap camera at night is selling you something. It could be a ruse. There are 10 million ruses out there. I'm not resting anything on it. I'm mentioning it because if I left it out and somebody else found it, you'd say I hid it. Right. Here's the actual reason I'm posting. And it's not the truck, and it's not the road. That third night, I got into Baladonia at about 10 to 2, and I sat in the cab and went through my phone the way you do, and there was a text from me to my wife, sent at 12:51 in the morning, right in the middle of the 52 minutes. It says, "Through the straight, ruses are shocking tonight. Be home to's Arvo. Love you." I didn't write that. I want to be really careful here, because this is where I'd stop believing me. That is exactly what I write. That's my spelling. That's my punctuation, which is to say, none. Arvo is what I say. She got it, read it, and didn't think one single thing about it. Because why would she? So the next day I sat down with 4 years of that phone and the telematics data the company still had, and I went through it, and I matched them up. There are 11 of them. 11 texts to my wife, sent from my phone, in the middle of periods where that truck was stationary somewhere it had no business being. Some of them are on the Nullarbor. 2 of them aren't. One is on the Eyre Peninsula, and one is 90 kilometers out of Port Augusta. They're all completely normal. Running late, love you. Fuel's up again. Tell Beck I said happy birthday. One of them reminds her to move the ute before the Garbos come, and she did move the ute, and the Garbos came, and none of that is a memory I have. 4 years. 11 of them. She's been having an ordinary conversation with something for 4 years. And it was polite, and it was useful, and it remembered the bins. Telling her was the worst hour of my life, and I did it badly. I had it all printed out, the telematics and the message log side by side with the times highlighted, because that's how my head works. And she looked at the paper and then at me and said, "So who did I say goodnight to?" I didn't have an answer then, and I don't have one now. I don't do that run anymore. I took a shorter contract out of Perth in 2022, and I'm about $40,000 a year worse off, and I don't care. My wife knows all of it now, which took me a while. I still keep the book. 22 years. It's a hard habit to put down. So here's what I actually want to ask, and I'm asking properly, because I've run out of people to ask it. If it can hold a truck on the brake for 87 minutes and text my wife in my own words and get the bins right? How would I ever know the difference?
8. And it's the 11 texts that do it. Take the texts out, and it's a 5. Last one. It's from New England, it's told by a man in his 70s, and it's here at the end because it's the only story tonight where somebody gets warned, and the warning turns out to be the truth, and somebody actually does something about it. I wasn't going to leave you at 3 in the morning with a dead man in a quarry. The next story is from r/scary stories from a user called Shoebox on the Shelf. It's called, "The Letters Were for the Woman Who Lived Here Before Us." There were 9 letters in the mailbox the day we got the keys, all of them addressed to a woman named Dorothy Vance, and I put them in a shoebox on the shelf of the hall closet. I'm 71. My wife Carol and I sold the place we'd been in for 34 years and bought a small ranch house on a dead-end street in southern New Hampshire, because the old place had stairs, and Carol's knees had opinions about stairs. $60,000 less than we'd hoped for. 1 floor, a carport, and a cellar with a bulkhead door out to the side yard. Our granddaughter Junie was 7 then. She stayed with us most weekends because our daughter works Saturdays. Junie slept in the back bedroom, which has the window over the yard and which she picked herself. The realtor told us the previous owner had passed. That's the phrase she used, and I didn't ask. And if you've ever bought a house from an older person, you'll know that's how it always sounds. The letters kept coming, about 1 a week, sometimes 2. I'll tell you what the first 4 months were actually like, because it wasn't ominous. It was mildly annoying. Carol thought it was a relative who hadn't been told, which happens more than you'd think, and I thought it was somebody's church group working off a bad list. We joked about it. There's no return address on the letters, postmarked from a town about 18 miles away. I did the sensible things, and they took months. I wrote, "Not at this address, return to sender," on a dozen of the ones that came after, and put them back in the mailbox. They kept coming. I took a stack down to the post office, and a very patient man named Ed explained that without a forwarding order there wasn't much to be done, and that legally I shouldn't be opening them, which I hadn't been. I asked the neighbors. The woman across the street said Dorothy had been there about 20 years and had moved out in a hurry in the spring, and that nobody had seen her since, and she said it in a way that closed the subject. In November, Junie started sleepwalking. Now, I want to be straight with you because I know what this sounds like, and I want you to have the boring version first, since the boring version is where we lived for 4 months. Kids sleepwalk. Our daughter sleepwalked at that age. We took Junie to her pediatrician in December and got told exactly that. It's common. It peaks around 8. Keep the house safe. Don't wake her. Don't make a thing of it. Good advice. We took it. We put a bell on her door. We put a gate at the top of the cellar stairs. I bolted the bulkhead door, the one that goes from the cellar out to the side yard, with a barrel bolt from the hardware store on the outside, so that it couldn't be opened from within the house. She went to the cellar every time. Not the front door, not the kitchen, not her parents' car in the driveway. She'd come out of the back bedroom at some point between 2 and 4 in the morning and go down the cellar stairs. And she'd stand at the bulkhead with her hand flat on it. And twice the bolt was open, on the outside, in February, in a yard with snow on it, and no footprints but mine from the afternoon. That's when I opened a letter. I'd like to tell you I agonized about it. I didn't. I sat at the kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning with my heart going, and I opened one. It wasn't crazy. That's the part that got me. It was 3 lines, and it said, "Please don't put a child in the back bedroom. If you have already, put the bolt on the inside of the cellar door, not the outside. I know how this reads. I am sorry. D. Vance." I opened all of them after that. 9 that morning, and the rest across the day. There are 31 now. There's no lore in them, no history, no curse, no story about the house. That's what I'd expected, and that's not what they are. They're a worried person writing the same short letter over and over to people she doesn't know, and getting a little more embarrassed each time, and about a third of them start with an apology. One of them says, "I expect you have thrown these away. I would have." So then I went and found her. That took about 2 weeks, and it wasn't detective work.
It was the town clerk's office, and then a phone book, and then a woman at a church who knew exactly who I meant. Dorothy Vance had not passed. Dorothy Vance was 84 and living in an assisted place 2 towns over with a view of a parking lot and a plant she was proud of. I sat with her for an hour and a half on a Tuesday. She was completely sound, sharper than me. She'd been a school librarian for 31 years. She apologized twice in the first 5 minutes for the letters, and I told her to stop. The first thing she said, once we'd got past all that, was, "Is it a child?" Not, "Did the letters reach you?" Not, "Do you think I'm crazy?" "Is it a child?" And when I said yes, 7, she closed her eyes for a second and said, "All right," and reached over and turned her radio off, and I understood that I was going to be there a while. She'd raised 2 boys in that house. The younger one had slept in the back bedroom and had sleepwalked to the cellar for a year and a half when he was 7 and 8, and had stopped, and was now 51 and lived in Ohio and didn't remember any of it. She told me she'd moved out in April because her grandson had come to stay for a week. I asked her the question you're all wanting me to ask, which is, what is it? What's out there? What's behind the bulkhead? And she looked at me for a while and said, "I don't know. I never went and looked, and I'm not going to start at 84. Then she told me the practical part, which is the only part she ever put in the letters, and which she'd worked out in about 1981 with no help from anybody. A bolt on the outside is a lock. A bolt on the inside is a decision. Whatever it is, it doesn't come in, and the child doesn't go out. And both of those things are true only if the bolt is on the side the child is standing on, and she has to think about turning it. She said her son stopped after about 3 months of finding the bolt shut and having to actually stand there and work it. She said it's like a screen door. It doesn't stop anything, it just interrupts. And then she said the only thing in that whole hour and a half that frightened me, and she said it in the same flat way she'd said everything else, she said, "They don't take a child who is awake." And I said, "How do you know that?" And she said, "Because I sat on those stairs for 12 nights in 1982, and they never once came while I was talking to him." I went home and I moved the bolt that afternoon. It took 10 minutes and a screwdriver. Junie sleepwalked 5 more times that spring. Every time we found her at the bottom of the stairs with her hand on that bolt, not turning it. Once, she said, without waking up, it stuck, and went back up to bed on her own. By June, it stopped. She's 10 now. She still stays weekends and she sleeps in the front room these days because she wanted the one with the better window for her telescope. And that was her idea, and I didn't push it. And I'll take that to my grave as the best acting of my life. Junie asked me about it once, that summer, in the car. She said, "Why is the lock on the wrong side?" 7-year-olds notice everything and file it for later. And I said, "Because that's the side you're on." And she said, "Okay," and asked for the radio. I've thought about whether we should tell her properly one day. Carol says no. I think one day, when she's grown and she's buying her own house, I'll tell her the whole thing, and she can decide what to do with it. Carol and I talked about moving. We're not going to. We're 71 and 73. We like the kitchen, and I am not selling a house to another family with a shoebox in the closet. We drive out to see Dorothy every few weeks. Carol brings her the lemon thing she makes. She's 87 now, and she's slowing down, and she knows it. And the last time we went, she asked me, very seriously, whether I'd keep writing the letters after. I said I would. The bolt is a $2 barrel bolt from the hardware store out on the state road. It's on the inside of the bulkhead door, about waist height on a grown man, which is chest height on a child. And I put it on myself with a screwdriver and 4 screws. It's been enough for 3 years. 7 out of 10 for that last one, and it's the only 7 tonight I'd call a comfort, because somebody in it gets warned, and somebody actually does something. So, the verdict. On my numbers, the ranger in Algonquin wins it at a 9, and the truck driver's 11 text messages are my favorite of the 8s. And I'd like somebody to fight me about that in the comments, because I don't think I'm right. But the one I can't put down isn't either of them. It's the woman in Leitrim with the €60 camera, the one I gave a 5, and it's been in my head every night this week.
5 out of 10, and it's the only one I've thought about while brushing my teeth. If you've got a story, scary or not, it doesn't have to be scary. The email's in the description, and I read all of them. And if you actually made it all the way to the end, the password is, there is no number 14. Put that in the comments so I know who's still awake. If you like the video, hit like and subscribe. See you in the next one.